Hello and welcome to Mighty Rooks. This is Amar, and today we'll be discussing some of the very important guidelines about the opening systems in chess. The game of chess is broadly divided into three phases: openings, mid games, and end games. So, opening system is very important, and at the beginner level players, it's seen that they tend to commit a lot of mistakes or create a lot of weaknesses in their camp in the opening systems. It is quite understandable because at the beginner's level it is very difficult to study all the vast material that is available for the opening variations, gambits, traps, and stuff like that. So, what I suggest is to understand these simple opening guidelines, and you will see a lot of improvement in your opening knowledge, and in your games when you're playing you'll find yourself in a pretty comfortable position after 10 to 12 moves by following these general guidelines. Controlling the center is one of the very important things the player should know in the opening phase of the game. As we already know, e4, e5, d4 and d5, these are the central squares, and these are very important from the player's perspective in the game. So player has to remember that he is not playing moves like h4, and as you can see that this pawn is really not helping the player to control one of these squares because it's far away, and also at the same time this move is not helping one of these to get developed. So at the beginner level players you would see a lot of times moves like a4 being played, and that's really not the best opening strategy one should be following. What white should do instead is start the game with one of these, and what it does, let's assume white plays his first move as e4, and he gets his bishop opened right away on the first move itself. His queen is ready to go to the h5, and it's really controlling this particular diagonal. Also, the white player is controlling two of the central squares, like one of the nearest central squares and one of the central squares. It's also occupying the e4 squares. So white has already got a really good start, and that is how a player should think about starting his game. Once you start your game with the central pawn to control the central squares, you need to know that you have to develop your minor pieces very quickly, and in chess time is the most important aspect, so you shouldn't be wasting your time. Let's assume white plays knight to f3 after the e4 and e5, knight to c6, and the bishop was played to e2. Black plays knight to f6, white plays something like knight to c3 and bishop to c4, and now if white plays something like bishop to c4, black will play d6, white will play something like bishop to b5 to pin this knight over here. Black will simply castle, and you can see that white is behind in the development. He is lagging, and all he has managed is get three pieces out, and on the other hand black player has achieved the king castled, and this bishop already open. Look at this poor bishop of white. This knight is already developed. The bishop is controlling here on f2. So because of the wrong opening strategy here by the white player, black has really gained a lot in the opening. He has already achieved the king safety. He has better pieces, as in better placed pieces, and he will be dominating this position throughout. So the player must remember that he shouldn't be moving the same piece again. Let's see what exactly happened in this game. So on the second move itself, White could have played bishop right here at b5, as he always wanted to put it there. But in the process, what happened exactly is he first put the bishop on e2, then he put it on c4, and then finally he got it to b5. And he wasted 3 moves of the same piece, and he lagged behind in the development. So, similar thing with the pawns. Let's take another example. Let's assume White starts with e4, Black plays e5, White plays knight to f3, knight to c6, and here White plays something like a3, and here Black will play knight to f6. White will play d3 to support this pawn, and Black player would play bishop to c4, a3, d6, knight to c3, and castles. In the same ideology, we can see that Black is still better here because White has wasted these 2 moves. Even if these moves are really not bad, but they are not really helping a White player to play aggressively in this game. These are very passive moves. Uh, it's really it's a fact that these squares are being controlled by these 2 pawns. But right now there was no real need for these 2 pawns to be played by the White player. So this seems to be a little wavered or the wrong strategy by the White player. And what exactly he is suffering because of these wrong moves is his king is still in the center, and Black player can target the king with moves like this, and he can really target the weaknesses in the position. Also at the same time, he will not be able to exert a lot of pressure on this diagonal here, because this pawn is blocking this bishop. So a lot of wrong things have caused White a really passive position here. Do not take your queen out early. That is very important thing. And at the beginner level, it is seen that players rush with their queen and try to get immediate victory with the queen in the opponent's camp. But actually sometimes if you find any stronger opponent, this might cause you a lot, because taking your queen early gives your opponent a very important time in the game, and he can develop his pieces by attacking your queen, and you'll have to continuously keep moving your queen away from the attack, and in the process you'll have your pieces undeveloped. Let's take a look at this classic game in the 18th century in France. I don't really remember the names of these grandmasters, but the game went something like e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and Black player took his queen out early, and the idea of this queen coming to h4 is to put pressure on this and this pawn. White simply supports with knight to c3, and this knight is already supporting the pawn on e4. So Black puts extra pressure with this knight hitting this pawn on e4. Now White is not really bothered if Black is going to take this pawn or not. He simply plays knight to f5. This knight is already supporting the e4 pawn, so queen cannot take this pawn, and this knight is taking this queen, so the queen has to go to a safer square. Look at this bishop, it is already controlling these 3 squares. So the queen really has only these two squares because this knight is supporting this queen if this queen takes the queen. So black plays queen to h5. Now white cannot really take the queen on h5, but white simply plays bishop to e2, and look at these three squares. The queen really cannot go because of this bishop sitting here. So black plays queen to g6. He thinks that his queen is still safe, but look at this, knight to h4, and black has found his queen going nowhere, and white has trapped black's queen. Now this knight is ready to take the queen, and the queen cannot save herself because all these squares are being taken by the white pieces. So you have to remember that first you have to develop all your minor pieces and place them on good squares, and then when it's required, the final blow in the attack, you have to take your major pieces, let's queen and rooks, into attack. King safety is very important thing one should know when he's playing the opening phase of the game, because let's assume a false strategy like f3, e5, g4, bang, queen to h4, and this is a checkmate in two moves. This is called a fool's mate, but a player should be aware that he's not making too many moves on his king side and weakening these squares which are surrounded by this king. So getting your king castled as soon as possible becomes one of the very important idea and strategy in the opening phase of the game. It can be different in case of the closed center position, but in the open center position and at the beginner level, I would say castle as soon as possible, because that will give you a better king safety and your rook will be ready to start controlling the central files. So let's assume e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, and bishop to c5. Here you can actually go ahead and castle, and what happens exactly by this move is you will have your king placed at a very safe square. It'll be very difficult for the player to attack your king behind these three pawns. So the rook is already in the center and it's ready and aligned with this king once it's on e1, and white can really play really risky moves even at the queen side, like c3, or I won't call them risky as such, but attacking and aggressive moves like c3 and d4 in a later phase of the game. He's not really bothered. If his king was here, he would really get scared to open up the position, but now since his king is castled behind these three pawns, he's really safe and he can really play explosive chess at the central squares. One of the very important things, let's assume after knight c6, one has to remember is not to play the pawns that are covering the king. I mean, if at all it is required, then it's a different thing, but if unnecessary moves, that's not gonna help, like h4 maybe. What is going to happen with this particular move is white is weakening his king, and he's not keeping his shelter properly sound position in sound position. So black can now have an advantage of just playing something like d6 and try to attack here with this bishop, the knight going to h5 and queen attacking this pawn. So one more important thing the player has to remember is once he castles, he shouldn't be moving those pawns at the castle side. That will not help his king to be safe. What it does is it opens up the lines for the opponent to attack your king, and it weakens up the surrounding squares. So one has to remember that once the king is castled, they shouldn't be moving those pawns, and they should be trying to keep their king as safe as possible. Thank you for watching. If you like, do subscribe to my channel. Good luck with your chess.